Okay, so we last left the French Revolution with uh, Louis ends up arrested after the flight to Varennes. And at roughly the same time, the new Constitution goes into effect. So Louis is a prisoner under house arrest, but still the executive of this new constitution that went into effect in September of 1791. Now, a bunch of stuff is going to happen kind of all at once. So we're going to continue down one path, but it's really important to understand that there is another separate path that we need to go down, and we'll go down this path when we start talking about Napoleon in a couple of videos. So at roughly this time, so here's that second path that we're not going to go down right now. Around this time, the other monarchs of Europe begin to actually pay attention to the revolutionaries. Because it was all fun and games watching France get kicked around by these revolutionaries until it seems as if monarchy itself might be in trouble. So once Louis gets arrested, the new King of Prussia and the Holy Roman Emperor issue a proclamation called the Declaration of Pilnets, which is issued in 1791 after Louis gets arrested. And basically, what the Declaration of Pilnets is it says, put Louis back on the throne, or else. And it kind of leaves this or else pretty vague. What was actually happening was, and we'll talk more about this when we go down this path in a few videos, but they were bluffing. They really didn't want to fight France, but they left it vague enough that it sounded threatening. Now, to the French, this is actually really threatening. And so before Austria and Prussia can attack France, the French declare war on Austria and Prussia first. And that is the thread that we're going to go down later. But this is really important for understanding what's going to happen with Louis. So we have to at least mention the fact that France is at war starting in 1792, and they will pretty much be at war until Napoleon is finally defeated in 1815. So we're going to handle all that war stuff separate, but just keep in mind that underneath all of this other stuff that we're going to talk about, France is at war. Okay, so back to the story of Louis. Louis does his job. As monarch, under house arrest. It's just that no one likes the job he's doing. He's not doing anything illegal. He's not doing anything wrong. He's following the Constitution. But while he's doing this, he is acting like a conservative. He is acting as a conservative while the legislative assembly, the legislature, is really revolutionary. And Louis is not having any of it. He's the only guy in the government that is a conservative. And the legislature doesn't like it. And the people that hate this the most are those sans-culottes. They hate that Louis is still in charge, technically, even though he kind of committed treason by trying to hook up with the Austrians and invade France. So the sans-culottes hate this. And they are kind of riled up by Danton and Marat. And into this mix also mixed into this are these super revolutionary soldiers / volunteers. They just volunteered to go fight the Austrians and the Prussians. So they're soldiers, they volunteered. These guys are from the southern French city of Marseille. These guys are super revolutionary. So they're maybe even a little bit more revolutionary than the sans-culottes. So here's what happens. This mix of being afraid of the war, Louis doing his job, but not doing the job that anyone wants him to do, and all of this revolutionary rhetoric coming out of Paris causes what's known as the insurrection of August the 10th. So on August the 10th, a bunch of sans-culottes and these people from Marseille, these volunteers from Marseille, they storm the palace in Paris where Louis was staying. And he ends up taking refuge with his family with the Legislative Assembly. So meanwhile, all of his personal guards are being slaughtered by these sans-culottes, these people from Marseille. And he's hiding in a closet with his family in the back of the Legislative Assembly. So basically what happens on August the 10th is that this mob forces the Legislative Assembly to abolish the monarchy, write a new constitution, and declare France a republic. So they do that pretty much all that day. So the monarchy is abolished, they're going to get a new constitution, and France is now a republic. So this is the period that is marked by a new group of people running the show. So we had the National Assembly, then we had the Legislative Assembly. Now we've got a new group. And this is the one that's going to be with us for a while. It's called the National Convention. And the point of the National Convention was to write this new constitution. But it serves as France's government until 1795. So it's a big group of people, like the National Assembly, but it has an executive body. So it's got a 12-member committee called the Committee of Public Safety. Which might be the most ironically named committee in history. The Committee of Public Safety, and it is led by Maximilien Robespierre. So he was the guy that put in place that ordinance that said that no members of the National Assembly could sit in the Legislative Assembly. So he manages to get back into the National Convention. And so he's now running the show. So the very first thing that the National Convention does, which isn't really its job, but they do it anyway, is they put Louis on trial. They put Louis on trial for treason. And there's a pretty vigorous debate about what they should do with him. Of course he's guilty. You couldn't get elected to the National Convention if you didn't think that Louis was guilty of treason. So he's definitely guilty. They all agree that he's guilty. But the question is, what's the punishment? Now, maybe the simplest solution is that there is a punishment for the king breaking the rules of the Constitution, and that's abdication. They had to force him to resign, and they did. But the national opinion in France, or at least the people in the National Convention, that wasn't nearly enough. So we've got to do something with it. And so then the debate is, Do we kill him or put him in jail? That's the debate. The kill him side of the debate is led by this group that's called the Mountain. These are the super radicals. The put him in jail group, these guys are known as the Girondins. So these guys are the radicals. These guys are the moderates. And what's kind of ironic is that they both started in the same group. Called the Jacobins. So they were all Jacobins. They were all Republicans. They all wanted to get rid of the monarchy. But then they broke into this group, the Mountain. And the reason they're called the Mountain is because they sat in the highest spot in the room, kind of in the highest risers in the room. So they sat in the highest spot, so they were called the Mountains. The Girondins were from a place called Gironde, so that's why they're called that. And they're moderates. The vote goes on for a long time, but eventually Louis's fate is death. And he is executed on January the 23rd, 1793. Now, we should probably say something at this point about how he is executed. He's executed using the guillotine. So the guillotine was meant as a quick and, one would hope, relatively painless method of execution. So there is kind of a sense of like Enlightenment humanity within the brutality of the guillotine. So it's meant to be something that's quick and painless, as opposed to the old medieval methods of execution, like hanging or drawing and quartering. All of those things are extremely painful and gruesome to watch. The guillotine is quick and it's over and it's, done quickly. There's also the sense of equality. Everyone is executed with the same method. So whether you are the King of France or some lowly commoner, everybody's going to get executed via the guillotine. So now that that's over with, now we can figure out what we want the National Convention to do. So the Committee of Public Safety the job of the Committee of Public Safety is to protect the revolution. That's the job of the Committee of Public Safety. Now, on the one hand, it is to make sure that France wins the wars. but we'll worry about that in a subsequent video. So we'll put that one on pause. The other job is to root out monarchists, moderates, and counter-revolutionaries. So, who are they going to be attacking? Well, we talked about this in a previous video. All of those priests that refused to follow the civic constitution for the clergy, they're suspect. Any nobles who stayed in France, even the nobles that were trying to help the revolution. Like, there were some nobles at the very beginning of the revolution that were very in favor of, some of them even were in favor of getting rid of the king, but definitely they were all in favor of reforming the tax system, getting rid of the feudal system. A lot of them were definitely in favor of the early parts of the revolution. They were all arrested, and a lot of them executed, including Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette was executed on October 16th, 1793. And a bunch of people that they considered to be counter-revolutionaries. So at this point, that includes all the moderates. Anybody that even questioned the execution of Louis. Were suspicious. And all of those Girondins were all executed. And at this point, anybody that could be seen as a threat to the Committee of Public Safety or a threat to Maximilien Robespierre were considered to be quote-unquote counter-revolutionaries. So even somebody like Georges Danton, who was the most revolutionary of revolutionaries, was considered a moderate, and he was arrested and executed. So, while the point of the Committee of Public Safety was to protect the revolution, in practice, it was to protect the Committee of Public Safety, and specifically Maximilien Robespierre. So that's why Danton was executed. There were a couple of other things that the Committee of Public Safety started to do. So part of protecting the revolution was moving France forward and getting rid of any sort of superstitious stuff from the past. So they do a big program of DeChristianization. So they are going to start renaming stuff. They're going to turn churches into public buildings. And maybe the most radical DeChristianization thing they do is they come up with a new calendar. They come up with a new calendar because the old calendar was based on religion. So they create a new calendar that is based on the harvest and the seasons and the weather. So, for example, the month of August is now Thermador because it's hot. So they kind of come up with like a mixture of French and Latin, and they rename all the months. Another thing that's part of this new calendar is that instead of a 7-day week, we now have a 10-day week. And the point of the 10-day week was to get people to forget when Sunday was, so they wouldn't go to church. Now, obviously, the French people don't like this. There's a practical reason, because on Sunday, you got the day off. So now you get a day off every 10 days as opposed to every 7 days, so that makes people mad. But it also, the French people are religious, and they like going to church. It was part of who they were. And now you're telling them they can't go to church. So no one really likes this calendar. But historians use it now to note important events. So we're going to have to deal with this this new Republican calendar for a little while, because all of the events are going to be based on this new calendar. So we have to deal with it at least for a little while. One last thing that they do, and I would like to come back to this later, is that the National Convention abolishes slavery in the Caribbean, mostly as a result of the slave revolt in Haiti. But I would like to come back and do more on this in a separate video because I think it's really important. Now, eventually, the Committee of Public Safety runs out of enemies. The Committee of Public Safety only worked when there were enemies to fight. But the Committee of Public Safety did a really good job of getting rid of all of their enemies. They got rid of their political enemies. And I know we haven't really gone down this path too much, but they were winning the war. So everybody's kind of asking themselves now, we killed all the people that were bad, that were threatening the revolution. Why are you guys still doing this? And the answer was Robespierre comes before the National Convention and gives a big speech where he says he has a new list of enemies of the revolution. And they're all in the National Convention, right in front of him, right in his audience. He's not ready to name names yet, but he knows who they are. So the people in the National Convention have had enough. They've had enough of the terror, which is how they ruled. They had enough of the reign of terror. And so that night, the night after he does this, Robespierre and his closest friends are all arrested and they're all executed the next day. Which pretty much ends the reign of terror, this period of time in which the Committee of Public Safety is running the show. Now, we had to go through all of that stuff with the calendar because this event is known as the Thermadorian reaction, because it happened during the month of Thermador in the year 2, which corresponds to, let's see if I wrote it down, August of 1794. So year 2 is the second year since they declared the Republic. So when they stormed the Legislative Assembly and forcibly took Louis off the throne, that's what they date the year 2. So this happened in Thermador, year 2, or August of 1794. So we'll stop there. And in our next video, we'll talk about, well, what happens now that Robespierre is gone and the revolution has kind of eaten all of its children. What does France do next? So that's what we'll turn to in the next video. And until then, this is Mr. Nissen signing off.